and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here. My name is Kim Menninger, and I'm a women's leadership coach. I started this podcast because as a lifelong sufferer of imposter syndrome and a coach who sees this in 98% of the women I meet, I wanted to take this conversation to a bigger stage, so to speak. Imposter syndrome is triggered by a lot of things, but two of the primary triggers are transitions and feeling different from those around us. Women in traditionally male-dominated environments experience these triggers on an almost daily basis, so it's only natural that we would feel this way. What compounds these feelings is the sense that we are alone, the belief that if we share our feelings, we'll expose our incompetence even further. So we carry it around like a deep, dark secret. I started this podcast because I want to put a stop to this nonsense and destigmatize imposter syndrome. Because we don't talk about it, we look around and assume that everyone around us has it all figured out, that we're somehow the exception to the rule, when in reality, we're all feeling this way. And when we can own that and say it out loud, we all benefit. Nobody more so than you. So thanks again for being here. If you enjoy it, please share it with others who might also benefit. Welcome, Alyssa. I have really been looking forward to this conversation. I'm very excited to talk to you today. And before we jump in, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to us.
Well, thank you, Kim, and thanks for having me on the show for sure. I love your topic and your mission. It's great. My name is Alyssa Dver, and I run the American Confidence Institute. And in our research, we do both primary and secondary kind of research around this very juicy topic. We're going to talk about confidence, and we certainly get into all different aspects, including imposter syndrome. And I do a lot of keynotes and workshops, and we have e-classes and stuff. So we're really on a mission to help people who are smart and hardworking feel confident as much as they are competent.
Perfect. That's really why I can't wait to have this conversation with you, because you have a lot of expertise in the confidence realm. And usually I start this conversation by asking, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? And I want to get that from you. I want to get an understanding of how you see imposter syndrome, but because you study confidence, I'd love to hear, what do you think of in terms of the relationship between imposter syndrome and confidence more broadly?
Well, I very deliberately just said that word competence, which is really kind of at the base of a lot of this conversation we're having today. And what I mean by that is confidence with an F, confidence, is essentially, when you boil it down, and again, if anyone's interested, watch one of my TED Talks or read the books. It is the definition neurologically as well as in the dictionary that it's a choice. And we make a choice about the truth of what we believe or value at that moment. So if I'm applying for a job, for example, and I believe that I want it and I can do it, I approach that with confidence. If I question that truth, that I want it or I can do it, then I start to have self-doubt, and it manifests in a lot of cases in terms of imposter syndrome. But here's where it gets a little fuzzy, I think, for a lot of people, is in their head, they're saying to themselves, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I really want this, I really want this, right? So they get that data and they have that competence feeling, but there is that something that then overtakes that and makes them go into imposter syndrome. So they start to doubt that they really can do it. And that's where I think that is really a fascinating line, right? I mean, it's easy if I said to you, Kim, for example, do you feel confident as a podcaster? And you say, yes or no?
Sure.
Yeah, you've done it. You've been there. You know how to do it, right? Are you confident in it? Yes. Are there always ways that you can do things better? That's life, of course, but you feel confident as a podcaster. If I say to you, do you feel confident as a, let's say, a digital marketer?
No,
maybe not, right?
Right.
So you have these kind of like, yes, no answers. But what happens is, if you were to all of a sudden be presented with an opportunity, say a job, or somebody asked you to consult, and teach them to do digital marketing for their podcast, where part of you're like, I really know how to do part of this. I'm really confident. The other part, I'm not so sure. You'd have to make that decision, yes or no, you could help them or not. And so again, that's where we come to these crossroads in our lives where we say, yeah, I probably could do it, but no. I'm not sure. And it's that not sureness, that moment that takes us down into imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think the way you're describing it in terms of a choice and talking about the crossroads, right, is we have an opportunity multiple times a day to be in this choice, right? Because there's so many different situations that we're encountering in the workplace and our everyday lives to ask ourselves, do I have what it takes to do this?
Right. Now, I'm going to throw something that a lot of people are going to get angry about. It's not my data. So, here's the thing. If we're talking about applying for a job in this context, where you look at a job and you say, I'm able to do 70, 80% of those tasks that are on the job. And there may be 20 or 30% that I've never done, or I'm not sure I'm really that good. Women will look at that and they're like, well, that 20 or 30% means I'm not qualified. I can't do it. I couldn't possibly do it. I'm scared to even apply, and they won't apply. And men, again, aggregate data, will be like, I can do it. I'll figure it out. And I think that's the skill set, and I'm doing the male-female thing here, but it's not necessarily male-female in all aspects, that people with confidence say to themselves, there's 20 or 30% of that job that I'm not 100% able to prove that I can do it. But in my head, I know that I could, or I can figure it out, that I'm capable, that I'm, quote, confident enough to fill in the gap. That's where the confidence is. It's that looking at anytime you're going, not sure, but I can figure it out. I can do it. That takes us out of the imposter syndrome right into, you know what? If anyone can do it, I can do it.
And so you mentioned the male-female piece there. Does your research show a difference between men and women when it comes to confidence?
Well, yes and no. And I say yes and no because it really varies. You could absolutely find differences in gender at an aggregate level, but there are so many exceptions that I really do believe that it is a social issue that most of us face in terms of imposter syndrome. We all have it. Men often, though, will get out of it faster. And it's not a research number. It's just an experiential number, like from coaching and so forth, is that they kind of, again, look, they can teach themselves that 20 or 30% delta is not enough to make them feel incompetent or lack of confidence. Women kind of look at that and they literally run the other direction. So, one of the things I think, again, I'm talking in generalities, not in research, which is kind of where I prefer to be, of course. But in generalities, think about this, Kim. How many women entrepreneurs or freelancers do you know that dabble in 5 or 10 different things?
Oh, not many.
Not many? I know. Or you're saying many. I know like many women. Many, you're saying many. So like they love to have their hands in everything. And the common excuse is like, I just love so many things. And that's not wrong. It's not wrong. But how many men do you know that do that?
Yeah, you're right. That's a really good point.
Right. And so, it's kind of like, let's fully commit, let's get it done, let's do it. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that those women are all using it as an excuse not to be great in any one thing. I do it myself, for crying out loud. But, there's one of these, it's kind of almost a data point, an anecdotal data point to say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it with as much energy and focus as I can do and get it done. And I think, again, that's a confidence reflection that is just, I don't think anyone who's listening to this can argue with. There's many others that I could pull out that say, it manifests very differently. I think men have the same self-doubts. They have that same moment of, I'm not sure I can do it, but socially or maybe genetically or wired in different ways, which science has not yet uncovered because we have not figured out if there's these fundamental differences neurologically. But, socially, they have figured out how to kind of move past them a little bit better, I think, in general than women.
It's so interesting. And I think that leads us to what you and I talked a little bit about before this call around the triggers, right? So when we talk about imposter syndrome, there are some pretty predictable triggers. And show up differently, I think, depending on your cultural background, your gender, all different pieces, depending on the situation. And so we talked a little bit about feeling different from the people around you. And so I think we have this perception that women tend to experience imposter syndrome more so than men. I wonder though if this is really just we see it in women in the workplace because we're still leadership in particular is still pretty male dominated, and when you show up in an environment where you feel different and you're comparing yourselves to the dominant culture around you and not feeling like you measure up or like you're the same, right? That's going to cause some kind of self-doubt.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we're talking about women versus men. How about just culturally, any kind of different race or sexual orientation or any of the diversity slices, if you will. I mean, yeah, of course it's going to weigh on your, confidence to fit in. And at the core of how our psyche works is this need to belong, this need to fit in, and need to not feel that people are judging you for anything other than your brilliance, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, of course, that kind of difference, diversity, and it can be, one of the things that I find fascinating, as Kim, from my background, I also do a lot of work in the diversity space. I run an association specifically for workplace diversity, and there are differences that you can see, color and nationality and so forth. But there's also things that you don't see, get into things like neurodiversity, the way different people think and operate. I have had a lot of clients that need time to process their thoughts or need time to process information. So they get into a meeting and there's a lot of information bouncing all around. And most of the time the extroverts are out there kind of like, mile a minute. And not to say that the client is necessarily introvert, but it's often very associated with introversion that they need to take in information and they need to think about it before they respond. So they leave the meeting and they can't say anything. They just literally paralyzed because they're not ready to speak and they don't want to be embarrassed and they just don't know what they're going to say. And then they leave and it's unfortunate. Then they beat themselves up. They're like, I missed my chance. I didn't show the right thing. And so it fosters lack of confidence and of course, in many cases, imposter syndrome, and they beat themselves up in a way that it just almost brings me to tears because they're thinking more thoughtfully actually than the people in the room. And we should give them that leverage and opportunity to come back and comment later, but we don't do that in a business setting. We just keep moving, right?
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit too about the psychological safety element, which this reminds me of as well, because it may be a less subtle form of lack of psychological safety. But if you feel like your only opportunity to show up is in a meeting where you are competing, so to speak, with people who do speak right off their top of their heads, they're in the, they're loud, they're confident, they're just showing up in the moment, and that's not your area of strength, or you have a different way of processing information, then you don't necessarily feel safe to contribute your thoughts. It feels like that's your only place to do it, and that's not your comfort zone, so to speak, right? So do you, when you think about confidence and when you work with just the general population around it, are you having conversations with companies? Are companies taking this seriously at all?
Yeah. So when you say companies, organizations, they could be universities or nonprofits as well as corporate entities, for sure. And, I think there is definitely a line between organizations that really want people to be psychologically safe and contribute and bring forward their collaboration and their innovation and all those things that we talk about. But there's companies that give it a lot of lip service. It's even harder now, of course, with remote workers and everybody kind of in a high stress zone. I mean, one of the things that, people giggle about when we get into our workshops, but it's really true, is there are always situations and it doesn't even matter. Like you could be on one side, you could be the victim or the villain in this case where people are always one-upping one another. Oh, I did this. Oh, I did that. I went on vacation to the Bahamas. I went to Bermuda. Ha ha ha. Right. People are always kind of dissing that, or smartest person in the room. Right. somebody presents online or otherwise, and somebody else is has to kind of establish them as the smartest person by correcting the person who's presenting. And the person who's presenting all is like, they like literally get pushed off their confidence track. So, and those things happen all the time, right? Like, I can give you lists and lists of these scenarios, these triggers that are really a reflection of one person needing to bully, and we accept it in our lives as adults, which is crazy, another person at the cost of their confidence. And so unfortunately, we're not prepared, we're not trained how to defend that. So a lot of organizations, I work, with, for example, an international bank, and they've made it clear to everyone, we want a speak up culture. That's what they call it, a speak up culture. Awesome. Well, how do you get a speak up culture? You get people who recognize not only when they are being bullies, but being bullied and how to deal with it. And there are very easy ways to do that. And when we think about bullying, we think of this long tail thing. A bullying situation, like the ones I mentioned, Kim, they happen every day to everyone. And I bet you and I will probably inevitably, unintentionally, might do it to somebody else. How about one of these? Like, I almost did it to you before, but it was a kinder version. Like, do you know so-and-so, or did you read that book? How many times, oh God, Kim, don't fall off your chair when you do this to you. But how many times a day does somebody say to you, oh, you read that book, didn't you? And you go, no, never heard of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's true, right? Or, I know so-and-so. Oh, you don't know so-and-so. Like, it's such a bully tactic. Right? It happens every day. And so those are those moments where you get that split second, literally a millisecond opportunity to make a decision. Am I going to say to Alyssa, oh, yeah, I read that book, and then feel like a loser? Or I'm going to say, Alyssa, never heard of that. Happens to me, I swear to you, like, at least 6 times a day. And it's probably because of what I do for a living. People are always like, did you read that? Did you hear that? Like, no, I didn't. Sorry.
Absolutely. That's such a great example. And I think it probably comes down to the relationship you have with the person that's asking too, right? So if it's your senior vice president, right, and you want to make a good impression, you're worried that what's he going to think if I say I don't know that, then you're going to show up very differently. And I would imagine say yes and just pray that he doesn't ask any follow-up questions.
Yeah, but it's that moment that you say to yourself, am I a total loser for not knowing that, right? And I sometimes I have to giggle, because when I look at it and I go, oh, I'm being bullied right now, that person's having the confidence crisis they have. Like, it's different when somebody says, hey, Kim, if you haven't read this book, I think it's really fascinating. Let me just share the title, do with it what, there's a different way to present that than saying, Kim, you read this, didn't you?
Exactly.
So, just think when that happens, that person's having a little bit of a confidence crisis. And it kind of helps me regain my sense of humor. And also I can then go, as a matter of fact, I didn't. Somehow I missed that. I appreciate you bringing it to my attention, right? And I can regain that. But yeah, thousands of examples like that where every single day our confidence gets kicked. And yet in those microseconds, again, we make the decision how we're going to handle it. And if depending on that answer, I think that's what either triggers the imposter syndrome or not.
So is it your recommendation in that case then to own it, to say whoever that person is, to just say, no, I haven't read that, but thanks for the tip or something like that?
Well, here's my personal recommendations, not even the institutional recommendation, which is this: is you can't possibly read every book and know every human being. There's just no way to do it, right? And there's a practicality that we have to always kind of bring back into our brain that says, I'm human. There's only so much I can do. And quite honestly, there's only so much that other person can do. They may seem to have read every book and may have seemed to know every person, but there's a facade. There's something that's not accurate there. And I have to kind of dial back my expectation. At the same time, you can still be, I don't want to say gracious, but thank you for that. Recognizing that person needs a little bit of a stroke, right? Like a little bit of a confidence kudo saying, hey, Kim, you know what? I really appreciate the recommendation. Doesn't mean I'm going to go read the book, buy the book, or do something or whatever you're telling me to do, but I've acknowledged that I've heard you, and that's really what that person wants. So I kind of put out their flame, I regain my own, we're all good. And, that's just kind of the approach. Now, if you kind of dial it back into, again, the science, the research about it, we are constantly being challenged in a way, again, to not belong, coming back to that key word of, not fitting in. And if I say to myself, in reality, in rationality, just because I didn't read that book or I don't know that person, does that make me not fit in? I mean, seriously?
Right.
Going back even to the beginning of the conversation, we get this like bizarre social expectation that a job description, like unless you've done every one of those things, and I will argue, clients that are job hunting, and I'll say to them, if I were a boss and I hired somebody who's done all of those things, I would really question either the bizarreness of that, like the chances are very unlikely, but more importantly, I want somebody who's like eager to learn new things and grow. I mean, that's something that's important to me. So, like there's a really good argument to say to somebody, look, I haven't done those three things. Or I've done them a little bit, but I'm really excited with the opportunity to kind of bring that knowledge and really expand based on your culture, based on your leadership, based on, again, making yourself belong to that new organization in a way that says, I want to be part of this. And, I think there's always not so much a way to spin it, but to analyze it and say, what is it about this situation or that job description or something that's making me feel like I don't belong? And how do I figure out more rationally in a way that I can belong, that I can feel, because I'm human and I just like everyone else that's applying or anyone else who hasn't read that book, I can move to that place if I choose to, if I value and I want to do it.
So much is coming up for me right now, and I want to make sure that I can keep my thoughts organized as I'm talking. But there's a couple things that in particular are coming to mind for me in this specific example, because I think this is a perfect example of things that we deal with on a regular basis, right? Is that we're looking at that job description, we're judging whether we think that 20 to 30% is worth going after this opportunity. And my perspective on this is I often tie, or I often make analogies to dating or romantic relationships, right? When it comes to work, because I could go on a first date and I could know that the person I'm sitting across from loves outdoor activities and is going to want to spend all this time kayaking and hiking. And I know I don't particularly enjoy it. I would rather be at home, right, reading a book. But I could tell them I love to kayak, and I could pretend.
Yeah.
Or I could say, or I could not engage this person at all, right, and just decide this is not a fit right out of the gates. Or I could say, you know what? I'm not really into kayaking, but here's something that I am, and here's why I'm interested, right? And then I'm not deceiving myself or the other person. I'm creating an opportunity for us to together evaluate whether this is going to be a good fit. And if it's not personal. It just means that I wouldn't be happy there anyway, because if I have to tell this person that's sitting across from me, I love kayaking and I love hiking, and then on my first day I have to show up and actually do it, oh God, right? That's miserable. So I'm going on this train of this particular date, right? But I think sometimes we think of these interviews as, I just have to make the best possible impression, instead of saying, no, here's who I am, tell me who you are, and we'll decide together whether this is a fit. And if it's not, that doesn't mean I'm not capable. It doesn't mean I don't have value to offer. It just means that I'm not going to be successful here.
Right. Now, and again, we're unpacking a lot in this very short form of a podcast, right? But, and I love the fact you brought it to romantic stuff, because I think it is easy to relate to. But, here's the thing. You hear this word authenticity thrown around so much, right? Especially in light of imposter syndrome. And it kind of raises my shackles, because it seems like we've given people permission to act like a-holes, right? That's not what it is. Authenticity really means that you are true to who you are and what you value. And when you stick to that, yes, you are not only more comfortable and confident, and you can say, I don't do kayaking, I do these other things. But here's really the secret. Again, don't fall off your chair. That's the sexiest of all. That's the most attractive, is when somebody is in a confident skin where they can say to somebody, I really respect that you love kayaking. It's not me. I don't do that. Like, that's not me. I would love to share that with you personally, but it's not my thing. I play pickleball, right? Whatever. That's so attractive. Now, why is it attractive? Because confidence is attractive. Our mirror neurons, our whole wiring is set to say, when somebody else who feels comfortable with themselves, it makes us feel more comfortable. So you're absolutely right that a recruiter or a hiring manager should be attracted to that. But in reality, you're right also that if it's not a good fit, and that going in, save yourself the energy and time, save them the energy and time to take a second date. Because you know what? Your gut is screaming at you, because your gut actually is taking information that your brain refuses to process. There's a whole, again, another conversation about vagus nerve connections, and the fact that your tummy actually really, your gut, listening to your gut really is true, because we have data that our brain is like, no, I got to get this job. Or I got to get a second date. And we deny that data that's screaming at us that goes, you are violating your own values. You are violating things that are important to you in light of trying to, quote, fit in. Hello, girlfriend, wake up, stop it, don't do it. And we don't pay attention to our tummy, which is screaming back because our head is just in denial.
Absolutely. And, one of the other things that you and I talked about, and I think this might be a good time to talk about it too, is what happens in that moment where maybe I am in an interview, maybe I am in a meeting, maybe I'm in some kind of workplace interaction and someone asks me a question and I just freeze. I wasn't expecting it. You called it the amygdala moment, which I love, right? What do I do? Because I find that that's the situation that arises most often for the people that I'm talking to, is they're perfectly capable, talented people, but they find themselves in this situation and they lose all ability to think clearly, to articulate their thoughts. And it just paralyzes them in that moment, right? So what do we do in that situation?
Well, it's funny that you say it paralyzes them. I'm gonna throw down a gauntlet here. Listen to some of the past podcasts, yours or other people's, and when you toss a question to somebody and they start going, right? That's also an amygdala moment. They may also kind of just talk, and it takes them 5 or 10 minutes to get to their answer because it's taking them that long to process, in their brain. With that said, you're right. Some people literally kind of that freak out moment. So what's happening is, there is a fear moment. There's a fear of not belonging, of being rejected. There's a fear of failure. There's a fear of potential regret. I may say something that I regret later. So all those fears, any one or multiple ones, are hitting the amygdala hard at that moment. And we have that, again, microsecond to decide, am I going to manage that fear in a rational way by pushing it literally into my prefrontal cortex in front of my brain, where I can be rational and executive thinking like. And if I don't make that decision, it goes down into my brainstem, which goes into survival mode. So the visibility that we see into survival, the visual cues are things like being aggressive or being shy, being not very coherent in our language and so forth. So those are the signs that we see. We can actually read it in people's faces. We can hear it in podcasts. It's no secret when somebody goes into a survival mode. The way to stay out of that is to stop. So not be paralyzed in I don't know what I'm going to do, but be paralyzed in a way that says, what am I going to do? And that's easier said than done. It really is. You have to start to learn to feel that. We can actually feel it when you start to pay attention, when you're mindful of that moment. You start to get nervous, you start to sweat if it's really extreme, but you start to hear your ums and your likes. You start to see those visible cues that you go, oh, wait, reel it back. So that's kind of like the holy grail on it. One of the easiest things to do is when you kind of sense that you need a little bit more time, is to take a deep breath. And people say this all the time. It's so overused in some ways. It kind of is frustrating, but a breath is a way to reset the entire neural system. In this case, we're like hijacking the amygdala, really hijacking the brainstem. Brainstem controls breath. It's one of the autonomic features. It's just like your heartbeat. So you're not thinking about it as we're sitting here talking. But if I deliberately think about breathing, I have now taken the function into my prefrontal. So I have stopped the process from going into my brainstem. Now I can have that amygdala moment kind of, all right, what do I want to do? So that's the easiest thing. Lots of other ways to kind of get yourself on track. If you'll allow me, let me throw out another one.
I would love that.
So not so much on a spur of the moment, maybe not like in a podcast moment or if you're in a meeting, but if you are about to go into an interview or you're going into a situation where you know you're going to be potentially unnerved. Amy Cuddy from Harvard and her power poses is one of the most famous examples of what's called using a structure. Now, a structure can be anything. It can certainly be a power pose. It could be a picture. It could be a song. It could be a quote. It could be an email or a text that somebody sent you that makes you just feel really good, positive, like I can do good in this world. I've done something powerful or otherwise positive. And I'll give you a perfect example of a story that it was a real story of a client. She was really trying to get promoted in a company. And one of the things that she was responsible for was running this weekly kind of status meeting. Half of it at the time was in person with people, and some people would call in from another location. And she literally would go into the meeting and get paralyzed, if you will. She couldn't speak. It really wigged her out. And I kept saying to her, what's the problem? What's the problem? Like, what is it that's making you so nervous, in so many words? And it was a combination. It was the nervousness around the technology they were using and running the meeting and possibly jeopardizing her promotion. All of this kind of soup of fear. And the more we talked about it, what it boiled down to for her was not just not being able to get the promotion on a personal level, but she was the mom of a 4-year-old girl. And after we started talking about, what was really kind of at the core of this fear, one of her greatest fears was that she was going to let down her girl, her baby, right? Her daughter. And let her down in a way. I wasn't getting promoted. I wasn't representing how women should act in the workplace. It was all that guilt and shame. And, talk about imposter syndrome. I mean, it was like the heaviest piece of luggage that she could possibly take on, right? Mm-hmm. So what resulted was finding a structure that was meaningful to her, which was just literally a physical picture of her daughter that she glued onto her laptop that she opened up because she had to bring the laptop to, trigger the technology to these meetings. And she'd open the laptop, she'd see her daughter, and it was like literally her own version of a power pose that would be like, I can do this. I have a reason to do it. I want to make my daughter proud. I want to make, the impression I'm leaving on people. This is what women in the workplace should be like. And Ken, let me tell you, like that day that she did it for the first time, she called me. She was like literally in tears. It worked. It was amazing. Like, so, I want to encourage people who are listening, find something that just brings joy to your heart and gives you that reason to do something that otherwise may be scary or uncomfortable. And a structure, athletes use them. That's why they're at the plate warming up in all kinds of weird ways. If they're baseball players, right? Those are all structures. Michael Phelps swimming with his arms flailing. He's listening to his playlist. Those are structures. And we can use structures too to overcome some of this fear and imposter nonsense.
I love that. I absolutely love it. And I think of that sometimes too. I was having a conversation with a client last week, and very similar to what you're describing, we were talking about what's bigger than the fear, right? What's more important to you than the fear of this moment, and finding a value that you care more about that's going to help outweigh that underlying fear. I want to ask you a question, because we talked a little bit about this when you were talking about the person that's bullying. And it occurs to me on a daily basis how much of our experience is rooted in just basic human psychology, and the fact that a lot of people are insecure. The bullies are insecure. The people being bullied are insecure, right? It's rampant in our world. And so I wonder if you have any other tips for people who are in, and I mean, my biggest tip for people who are in really toxic environments is just get out. But for people who on a regular basis have to deal with those people that are insecure and they're trying to make themselves feel better by putting you down, or they just, have dysfunctional ways of engaging, is there anything that you would suggest that I do if I'm in that situation to just maintain my own neutral level of confidence? And maybe it's some of the things that you already said. Maybe it's the taking a deep breath. Maybe it's just in the way that you respond. But I want to ask that question very pointedly, because I know there are a number of people listening who just feel like every day they're bombarded with these people's own baggage and not sure quite how to. And I always say you can't control how other people behave, but you can control how you respond to it. And so just any thoughts on that piece of this?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, my heart breaks when people you pull out that word toxic. There's so many toxic people. And when you said there are some people who have insecurities, you know what? Everyone has insecurities.
Yes.
That's the reality. Everyone, you and I have insecurities, but there are different ways to embrace those. And what I mean by different ways, if you look at your insecurities as these are things that I'm just not good at or I don't like, and make it fact, that's a really good place to start, right? Some people can't do that, though. They look at their weaknesses as their vulnerabilities or their Achilles heel, however you want to look at it, and that they have to protect those areas so they're not exposed, right? And then they become very aggressive or they become toxic in that case. So again, understanding why those things happen is your best defense, and to almost rationalize in a way that you're not sorry for them or pitying them, but you go, it's their problem. I'm not carrying that luggage for them, right? That's their problem. And it's not going to penetrate my confidence because it's their confidence issue that's hurting. I'm just the target of it. So that's a very, very key strategy, is just recognizing and understanding it. I think the other side of it is not to roll it to other people. It's natural for us to take that negativity, that toxicity, and want to, kick the dog, right? Or yell at your kids or take it out on your partner. And one of the things, you have to have safe outlets to get rid of it. But the best way to get rid of it, I have found, is actually flip it on its head and go out of your way to make somebody else feel more confident. So somebody rolls negativity to you, not necessarily turn around and be Pollyanna, but be more like, hey, Kim, you know what? You run an amazing podcast. I'm so honored to be here. Like, that makes me a superhero by making you feel good. And so being able to kind of take that negative energy. I don't know if you remember, Disney does such a great job with this, with, Monsters Inc. and stuff. And you take that negativity and you create positive energy, right? Turn it into laughs kind of thing. I think that's the secret. I think you have to be able to recognize that somebody is hurting inside. They're trying to steal some of your confidence to mend themselves. Just, you can give them some if you want, but reality is protect your own and then turn around and help somebody else. And that's the way it goes away. I can't tell you how much I love the fact that you said if it's toxic, you have to really do make a decision that life is too short. Get the hell out of there if it's really sapping you on a daily basis. But if you can manage it in a way that, again, flip it into something positive, I think that that's a really great opportunity.
I love that answer. And I think it helps me too, because I'm always looking for self-empowerment strategies, right? I think it's really easy to get caught up in the fact that everybody's insecure and I don't know what to expect from other people who come into the room with me. And that makes me anxious. But if I know what I can do in those moments when people behave in dysfunctional ways, then it doesn't really matter how other people behave. I know what I'm going to do in response. And I have a choice here. Right. And I think you're absolutely right that it requires a certain amount of self-awareness and psychological maturity to be able to act on what you're describing, to basically, I think it starts with that deep breath, right? Neutralizing that physiology so that you can think straight, and then saying, this is a person that's really insecure. I'm going to recognize it for what it is and help them with their own confidence right now. And that gives us confidence in the process. So I think that's a really great way to think about it.
Yeah. And you say he's mature, I, in my TED talk and otherwise, I'm kind of now overquoted saying, you don't get your full confidence till you're 60 because you finally realize that it's irrelevant what other people think about you. It's what you think about yourself. And it does take us 60 years. Now I do see your confidence bloom in a lot of young people. And so it's not necessarily that everybody has to wait until 60, but I think the difference is when you're really clear about what you want. And I'll, kind of throw a little bit of a curveball at you in the case that there are times that even I will deal with somebody that I know is a train wreck of a confidence person, right? They literally are insecure through and through, but I will deal with them because it's of value to me to get either past them or win them over. I think, the classic example are in-laws, right? Sorry, I have an in-law who's a real bully, and it's horrible. Am I going to change him? No, I am not. But at the same time, it's important to me that my kids have a grandparent that they respect and they feel part of the thing. My kids see through it. I mean, they know me and they know my stuff, so they always comment about grandpa's insecure, I'm like, or whatever. But there are moments where you're going to make the decision to deal with that toxicity or that person that really irks you for reasons that are valid, that you're conscientiously making that decision. And when, again, you're empowering yourself to deal with it. If you're in a job and your boss is horrible, you might say to yourself, you know what, I don't want to leave. I really like the culture. I really like what's going on here. I like the work that I do. I like the other people, but my boss, I just can't work for her anymore. So what can I do to get around it? Or I'll just try and avoid it. I've had clients like that in a Fortune 500 company. Let me tell you, there was one boss, and I think I had 4 of her subordinates call me independently for coaching because she was so mean to them. And, the decision point is literally that, is like, how important is it to stay where you are? Do you have options? You think it through. And when you think it through and you make that conscious decision, again, grab that amygdala moment on a grand scale, that's what's going to get you through that moment of confidence doubt. It's going to get you through that. Am I not as good as I think I am because I'm being told otherwise? No, I'm as good as I think I am. That person's the problem.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's such a great point too, about just recognizing that you're making a conscious decision, because it's more strategic than that one relationship. If you chose to stay there, and you're not a victim, right? You're making a conscious choice, and this may be a really painful experience, but there's a reason why you've decided to do that. And that hopefully allows you to continue to see the value that you have to offer while navigating the complexies of that.
Right. And, I'm not a big lover of gossip in any way, shape, or form, but I think sometimes you have to also validate. Maybe you are doing something or don't know something that's really important, or being in denial for whatever reason. I mean, let's not just assume that we're all perfect, because we're not. And I think there's often learning moments where even a negative, toxic person can teach us something about ourselves that maybe we're not seeing. We don't necessarily like the delivery of the message, but there's often a nugget in there. So, I also want to encourage people, if you're getting negative feedback or somebody is criticizing you, to not necessarily accept it. I always say there's a very big difference between acknowledging and accepting. But acknowledge that you heard the person. Okay, I appreciate that. I will look into it further, or I'm going to consider that. Does not mean you have to agree or otherwise even change. But I think there are sometimes situations where, the toxicity is a reflection of bad delivery, but it's worth just asking a colleague, what do you think about this? Am I missing something? Or what do you think was the real intention? I've had circumstances, actually, it's funny, Kim, and recently I'm dealing with a colleague who is really, really insecure. It's at a client company, and very knowledgeable individual. In fact, is a coach. So, there's an irony or maybe a paradox here. And what I learned sometimes is people just they don't have their own coach. They don't have their own mentor or ally, and they just need to talk. They need to think things through. They need somebody to trust. And, I was reflecting on this in the past that even bosses that I've had, if you engage with them in a kind of helpful conversation, hey, you know what, you're clearly upset about that. I'd like to understand it better. And you're rational and you're calm. I hesitate to say that, but that horrible moment of it getting yelled at, you can actually use it not so much for lemonade, but make champagne out of it. Like, yay, I got it in. Like obviously there's emotion and there's interest in talking. So let's use that, right?
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. I think that we have so much more power than we think we do, and if we can really manage the amygdala moments, right? I think we have so many more tools available to us than we think we do. I could seriously talk to you all day. This
thanks.
is so fascinating, and I loved it. But in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk a little bit about the free resource that you're making available. And for anyone who's interested, there will be a link in the show notes, so you can go there to find it.
So you say free, and of course people think it's not going to be good, but here's the deal. I am on a mission to bring more confidence to the world, just like you are. And so especially during now with our weird world that we live in, I'm going to give everyone a copy of my latest book for no cost. But here's the deal. It's a PDF. You have to go to the site, AmericanConfidenceInstitute.com/Kim, and just fill in a quick little, not even a form, just put your name and so that we can give you the legal copy of it. And the exchange for it is not just listening to us talk now, but the exchange is that I hope people will use it to bring more confidence to the world, because that's really the goal.
I love it. I really hope that, and I'm sure a lot of people will. Thank you again, Alyssa. This has been such a pleasure, and you've given us so many great things to think about. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so honored, and I appreciate you, Kim. So thank you.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.